Good morning. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. I've got a pretty full presentation, so we're going to start right on time. You can't hear me? All right. Oh yeah, it makes a difference, doesn't it? All right. Let me do this then. There we go, because I'll probably be over on this side a lot. Well, welcome everybody. My name is Bill Feist. My call sign is WB8BZH, Willie Baker 8, Baker Zulu Hotel. I am the Southern Territory SATERN Coordinator for the Salvation Army. Now, I'm going to warn you right up front. I've done a lot of research on this subject and so on, but I am by no means an expert, so don't think you're getting to talk from some, great expert on this subject. I'm also not a doomsday prepper, okay? So as you hear this talk, this is not one of those, oh my Lord, we're all going to die talks, okay? It really isn't. I am, however, a certified emergency manager with the International Association of Emergency Managers. I am trained to look for and think about and plan for the very worst things that can happen and then hope that the very best things that happen. So kind of take this talk in that vein. So let's talk about what a black sky event is. First of all, dark sky events and black sky events are two different things. Dark sky events are an astronomy event. If you're an astronomy buff, and I am, by the way, then that's where you go out and you go out someplace that's really dark that has the least amount of light pollution from civilization as you can find in order to view the heavens. That is a dark sky event. A black sky event is a catastrophic, widespread disruption of the power grid for long durations. Now, think about that. That's three parts to all of that. It's catastrophic, it's widespread, it's long-term. That's what makes up a black sky event. Now, there are also gray sky events. Your typical, they're a little bit worse than your typical blackout that lasts for a couple, 2 or 3 hours. A gentleman here was telling me about one that happened after, I think it was Hurricane Charlie, that went on for 3 weeks. That would probably be more like a gray sky event than a true black sky event. Black sky event, a good example would be Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, where it took them 11 months to recover their power. That's a black sky event. So let's talk about the possible impacts of a black sky event. I don't think it's any surprise to anybody that our society has become increasingly dependent upon electricity for the last 100, perhaps even 150 years or so at this point. It's no longer a convenience, it's a necessity for modern life. I want you to think about the COVID pandemic that we've been going through here. Oops, did I get out? I've got ahead of myself here somewhere. Hang on, I'm one slide ahead. There we go. I want you to think about the COVID pandemic that we've been through and some of the things that we've been through. Inflation, lack of fuel, lack of supplies, all those kinds of things will happen in a true black sky event, okay? So there are a lot of, oddly enough, a lot of similarities, a lot of comparisons that can be made. So let's talk about the medical sector for a second. First of all, for a lot of people, electricity is a matter of life and death, particularly those who are on dialysis and life support machines and that sort of thing. Hospitals require electricity. Now, most of your hospitals have generators, but if they can't get fuel for those generators, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit, they got a problem. The transportation and fuel industry requires electricity, so it's very possible that hospitals can start to shut down. Patients on life support and dialysis, as we just mentioned. Natal care, babies being born. If your hospitals aren't open, now your babies are being born in a medical clinic somewhere, or very likely at home with a flashlight. Cooking, that can become difficult. You know, a lot of your modern stoves today require, if they're gas stoves in particular, they require electricity just to turn the gas on. You know, we've got stoves that even if you turn the gas valve on, if there's no electricity to allow the gas through to the burner, it just sits there. So even having a gas stove is no guarantee of having what you need. Air conditioning, very tough on the young, the elderly. Imagine living in a high-rise. You're on the 15th floor in New York City or some other big city. You've got to climb the stairs, carrying your groceries or whatever, up to that 15th floor. You get into your apartment. It's a high-rise. The windows don't open in a lot of the newer high-rises, and your windows are facing south towards the sun, and it's 95 degrees in the shade outside. Your apartment's an oven, and that's what you might be facing. Local fuel supplies. Fuel pumps aren't going to work. They need electricity. So your gas stations aren't going to be able to pump gas unless they've got a hand pump of some sort to pull the gas up out of with. Your credit cards aren't going to work because there's no telephone, no internet, none of that to make the credit cards work. Your fuel supplies, they may not even arrive. Once they do run out of gas, if they can get the gas out of the ground in the first place at your local gas station, new supplies may not arrive because they come in tanker trucks. What do tanker trucks need? They need fuel. So fuel shortages, again, remember the pandemic? Remember some of the fuel shortages we had? Pipelines require electricity. So they're not going to be able to pump fuel because there's no electricity. The transport trucks require fuel. Let's talk about the food supply. First of all, no electricity, you're going to have a lack of refrigeration. Lack of refrigeration at home, lack of refrigeration at the stores. Again, transport. Once they run out of food, they may be out of food, period, because they may or may not be able to get food into them. Your grocery stores, your convenience stores are going to be closed. Again, they can't run the credit cards and so on. They have no electricity, they have no refrigeration. Once they run out of food, they're closed. There was a study done in 2018 in the United Kingdom that showed that in the United Kingdom, the average household was 4 meals away from anarchy. That means that they had 4 meals in their home, and then they were out of food. 4 meals. Imagine what happens in a society where food is no longer available and everybody's run out of food. Garbage. Again, no fuel to run the trucks. The workers probably don't have fuel for their car to get to work, to run the trucks, even if the trucks do have fuel. So now you've got garbage piling up, you've got rats coming in. Yeah. Water supplies. There are 153,000 public and private water systems in the United States. They all need electricity to run. Waste treatment. There are 16,500 waste treatment plants in the United States. And again, they all require electricity to operate. So electricity can indirectly or directly threaten the waste treatment process and the water supply. Does it directly by cutting off the electricity needed to operate and monitor the systems? Indirectly, because it cuts off the fuel supply for their generators, for the vehicles that are bringing them the supplies, the chemicals and so on they need to operate the plant with. In August of 2018, there was a city lift station in Olean, New York. It pumped 45,000 gallons of raw sewage into the Allegheny River, just upstream from a town's water supply. Guess why it stopped? No electricity. They had a power outage. The Department of Homeland Security in 2014 said that the ability of 12 critical service sectors in the United States would be degraded by anywhere from 33% to 99% within 2 to 8 hours. That's not days, that's not months, hours. Up to 99% degraded. Now these sectors include the fire service, 911, all your other public safety, water supplies, sanitation, medical, industrial and manufacturing, the financial sector, agriculture, government, commercial, your stores and so on, transportation, and electrical power generation itself, including nuclear power plants. Keep in mind, nuclear power plants need water to cool the spent fuel rods and the reactor cores. Now, they have generators to pull that water in and so on, but if they don't have any fuel for the generators, like the financial sector, or like the water sector, the financial sector is heavily integrated with all the other sectors. Black sky event will limit or severely degrade the nation's communications, including telephones and cell phones and internet. All of that the financial sector needs to operate with. Without that, they're shut down. Banks and financial centers can't open or operate because they don't have all of that. Paychecks, Social Security, whether by check or direct deposit, can't be done because, again, there's none of that communications infrastructure. How many of you in here are on Social Security along with me? No check, no direct deposit. Credit cards can't be used, so it becomes a cash economy. ATMs don't work for all the same reasons, so you have no cash for the cash economy. Now, the federal government says they have plans to deal with all this. Keep in mind, Keep in mind they had a plan for COVID too. So, yeah, okay. Truthfully, they do have a plan, but a lot of the experts say the plans are inadequate at this point in time. Transportation sector. They need electricity to pump the fuel locally for fuel delivery, pump the fuel through pipelines, to charge electric cars. Whoops, sorry, I really do have to keep right on that microphone, don't I? Charge electric cars. Public transportation, you know, buses, trains, that sort of thing, taxi cabs, Uber, Lyft. Here's one you'll love, traffic lights. Imagine living in New York City, trying to drive through New York City without any traffic lights. Wouldn't that be fun? Or Chicago, or LA, or Jackson, Mississippi, where I live, for that matter. I mean, it'd be a nightmare. Without communications, airports, the entire flight industry is done. No power for radar, no power for flight, for traffic control, air traffic. No power to run all the scheduling that has to go on for your airline engine. It's shut down. If you think back to 2001, 9/11/2001, when they shut the airports down for a few days, remember how long it took for the flight industry to gear itself back up? So, society itself is going to be dramatically impacted. Government services, especially at the federal and state levels, will be disrupted. This will make local government and service more important. This may lead to people and communities becoming increasingly isolated, socially, economically, politically. And this may be particularly true if it becomes difficult for them to receive news from the outside world of what's going on. Civil unrest. In 1977, there was a blackout in New York City. Hang on a second, I lost myself here. There was a lot of looting. I forget, it was something like 1,600 arrests, 550 police officers were injured. They had another 1,600 arson fires, 14 of them multiple alarm fires. So, yeah, it can get ugly in a big hurry. Communication sector. Now, this can be caused by a coronal mass ejection, or CME, and we're going to talk about all that in a little bit, or similar events. That'll degrade HF radio, ELF, your extreme low frequencies that the military uses, particularly in the Navy. Satellite-based phone, cellular, internet, GPS services. How many remember using maps instead of the little lady in the box? Yeah, get ready for that. Terrestrial events can do it too, though. You know, they can take out landlines and cell phones, the internet. They can take out your on-the-air television, radio, particularly those that are automatically operated. Think about how many radio stations in particular there are now that they're getting their whole feed over the internet. I mean, they don't have a studio in town. They're getting their feed from California or wherever, right? If that's gone, that's all gone. Time of season, time of year, or geographic location, whether you live in the north or the south, rural areas, suburban, major metroplexes, all of that impacts how those people will be impacted by a black sky event. Imagine living in North Dakota. I lived there for 20 years. First 2 weeks of January, solid 20 below. Never gets above 20 below the first 2 weeks of January. Imagine having no electricity and no heat in those kinds of conditions. Or living in the deep south, where I do now, in Jackson, Mississippi, where it's 95, 100 in the shade and the humidity's off the chart, and you have no air conditioning. So yeah, all of those factors are important. So now we've talked about the impacts. Let's talk about some of the things that can cause a black sky event. And if you excuse me, I'm going to get rid of this tunic. It's warm up here. There we go. Okay. First of all, there are natural causes for black sky events. In fact, they're probably the more common causes for black sky events. We have such things as seismic events, severe space weather, and severe terrestrial weather. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of those. Let's talk about seismic events. What you see here, that ring of red around the Pacific Ocean, that's called the Ring of Fire. Okay? It's a ring of volcanoes and seismic zones that surround the Pacific Ocean. And this is where many of the earthquakes and the volcanoes happen on the Earth. Excuse me. Now, the exception to that is, you'll notice right in the middle of the country, there's one called the New Madrid Seismic Zone. Okay, that's right in the middle of the country, right in the breadbasket. So let's talk about some of these. First of all, let's talk about New Madrid. It's right in the center of the country. It's in the very lower southeast corner of Missouri. The last big quake there was 1811 to 1812. It was estimated to be a 7.7 magnitude quake. It rang church bells in Boston, 1,000 to 1,500 miles away. Today, a similar event would impact 8 states in the Midwest surrounding all that. It would destroy Memphis. Memphis is a pile of rubble if this happens to that kind of a magnitude. It's going to seriously impact other large cities like St. Louis. Worse, much of the nation's power infrastructure passes right through that seismic zone. A lot of the fuel infrastructure, the pipelines, goes right through that seismic zone. So if it goes off, it's going to impact our entire nation. Then there's this Cascadia subduction zone. Last major break was in 1700. It was a 9.0 magnitude quake estimated. It caused the western coastline of Washington and Oregon to drop several feet. A similar event today would cause serious impact to several major cities, and I think you could all name them, you know, Seattle, Tacoma, Portland, up into Canada to Vancouver and British Columbia. It would also create a tsunami with a height of perhaps as much as 100 feet. Now, scientists also believe that a major break in the Cascadia subduction zone could trigger an earthquake in the northern part of the San Andreas Fault. They believe that the San Andreas Fault is really set to go someday. I mean, it's built up enough, you know, pressure under there that it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Impacts of such an earthquake would result in serious damage to major cities throughout Southern California and western Arizona. Then you have the Denali fault zone, which is in Alaska. The last one was a 9.2 magnitude quake in 1964. Killed 134 people, destroyed a large part of downtown Anchorage. It also resulted in a tsunami that seriously damaged or destroyed a number of coastal communities along the Alaskan coast. Now in 2018 we had a 7.0 quake very near the same spot. Didn't do nearly as much damage for a couple of reasons. First of all, because Alaska's just done a really, really good job of enforcing building codes for earthquakes. So the buildings are much stronger, much more capable of withstanding that sort of thing. Very, very important. The other thing that was important was in 1964, the energy was contained in a very small spot. In 2018, the damage spread out across a 25-mile line, so that the energy was spread out much, much wider. And finally, we really do need to mention places like Puerto Rico, the Pacific Islands, Hawaii. They are all subject to earthquakes from time to time as well. Space weather. Let's talk about space weather. The things that cause space weather for us are generally called geomagnetic storms or geomagnetic disturbances, or GMDs for short. GMDs can induce very powerful currents along long power transmission lines and through the electrical grid transformers. Now, a GMD can consist of several different kinds of events. The first is a solar flare, which is an eruption of electromagnetic radiation. They're often associated with and near sunspots. The impacts from a solar flare travel at the speed of light. Okay, so that means it'll impact the Earth in about 2 minutes. Coronal holes are next. They're regions of the sun's corona with a colder solar temperature than the rest of the sun's corona. Those impacts also travel at the speed of light and can get to us in about 2 minutes. The one you really have to watch out for, though, is a coronal mass ejection, or CME. It's a significant release of plasma and accompanying magnetic fields from the sun's corona. They often follow solar flares, and like solar flares, are often associated with sunspots. Now, solar plasma for CMEs travel much more slowly. It'll take 24 to 36 hours for the impacts to be felt from that. But the impacts can be really catastrophic depending on how it happens. Here's a couple of good examples. The Carrington event, 1859, impacted the global telegraph system throughout the world. It was a CME, and it sent very strong electrical currents across all the telegraph lines across the world. Operators that were using the telegraph at the time got knocked on their fannies. It was that powerful. Telegraph operators reported that they disconnected themselves from the power and could still send messages just with the power built up in the system. There were spectacular auroras. In some places where there was an aurora at night, it lit the whole sky up like it was daytime. I mean, this was a huge event. Then you have the Quebec blackout in 1989. Major communications disruptions. It caused a chain reaction throughout central Canada and much of the eastern and central and southern United States. It disrupted the orbits of communication satellites, including the GOES satellite and the Space Shuttle Discovery sensors. It disrupted global HF communications. The impacts of this event lasted several weeks. Now, in July of 2012, there was another CME that was very similar in magnitude to the Carrington event I discussed a little bit ago. The good news is it was pointed away from Earth, so the Earth did not feel the impact. But scientists say that if that event had happened a week later, it would have struck the Earth directly. Such an event would cost up to $2.6 trillion in damage and might have taken as long as 4 to 10 years, that's years, to recover from. Most scientists believe, again, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of it's going to happen someday. It's a matter of when. Again, think about the pandemic and some of the impacts that have come from that. So, terrestrial weather is also an impact. Severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, tropical weather systems. The Department of Energy and other government reports say that there is a risk that climate change will produce increasingly extreme weather events and other challenges to the electrical grid in the future. For instance, Tornado Alley. Traditionally, that's been what? Oklahoma, Nebraska, Kansas, and okay. A lot of scientists believe Tornado Alley is shifting southeastward into my home territory of Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama in particular. Oops, excuse me, got ahead of myself. This it can also cause ocean levels to rise, which impacts pipelines, fuel pipelines, electrical generating stations that are along the coastline, nuclear power plants that are often located along those large bodies of water. This year's forecast is for an above average hurricane season. If that holds true through 2022, it'll be the 7th year in a row that we have had an above average hurricane season. And that's being caused by warmer ocean temperatures. Those same factors that increase the danger level, if you will, or the risk factors for hurricanes also impact our severe weather. Tornadoes, thunderstorms. If you've noticed, we've been having a lot of tornadoes lately, a lot of thunderstorms lately. we'll talk real quickly about some examples. Again, the New York City blackout. We talked about that a moment ago. There was a derecho that happened across the northern part of the country, started in Ohio and moved its way across into the mid-Atlantic states. A derecho is a cascading series of thunderstorms that just keep feeding on each other as they move eastward. And then, of course, there's Puerto Rico with Hurricane Maria. 100% power outage, 98% communications loss. Took them 11 months to get the power grid back up and operating. Now, understand that's not all just a result of Maria. Maria was kind of the trigger that made it happen. But the Puerto Rican Power Authority, they were badly in debt even prior to Maria, like $9 billion in debt. They used substandard parts and non-standard parts, so when U.S. power companies started to send in work crews and equipment to fix it, the equipment they brought in that's standardized across the United States didn't fit their grid because they had used all these non-standard parts. So there were a lot of factors that went on in all of that. Now, black sky events can also be human caused. And we're going to talk about some are unintentional, and unfortunately, I don't think it's any surprise, some are intentional. The most common unintentionally human-caused black sky event is due to electrical infrastructure failures. The American Society of Civil Engineers graded the United States electrical infrastructure in 2017 with a D+. That's D as in David, plus. Okay. Imagine as a high schooler or a grade schooler and you came home and showed mom your report card with a D+ on it. Okay, that's what we're talking about here. Oops. In 2017, there were a little over 3,500, almost 3,600 power outages for an average of 49 minutes each throughout the United States. Infrastructure failures can also cause a black sky event, and they also contribute to black sky events not caused by an initial failure of infrastructure. Puerto Rico being a good example of that. Again, some real quick examples here. Northeast American blackout. The red is where the blackout was at. 30 million people, 180,000 square miles. It was caused because somebody set one protective relay at too low of a level, and it tripped, and then the blackout just cascaded from there. One relay inappropriately set. That's all it took. Northern India, they had two of them back to back. Part of the problem is they had a very poorly operated power grid. It was also extremely overloaded because they were having a huge heat wave during that time. It affected over 1 billion people. 9% of the world's population was impacted by this black sky event. Then, of course, there are the, shall we say, the less fun things to think about, like electromagnetic pulse or EMP. This is primarily would be due to the detonation of a nuclear weapon of some sort at high altitude. It would strike on an unprotected power grid, and it will have a large regional footprint. And that would cause an extended duration black sky event, catastrophic. The other one would be what we call a IEMI, or intentional electromagnetic interference. Okay, this is basically a machine that can produce a very small level EMP that can be targeted at a building It can be, its range is much, much less, of course, than an EMP. It's also known as a radio frequency or RF weapon. It can sometimes produce multiple repeated pulses and are typically quite mobile. The assets most vulnerable to this kind of an attack are computers and electronics, and they'll point it at the ingoing power lines to a building or directly at the building, particularly if there are windows. It can cause computers to fry, relays to misfire. It can do all kinds of things. Commercial and military versions of these systems are available or under development in a number of countries. Here's the scary part. They are very easy to construct. There are currently existing YouTube videos that will teach you how to make one of these things. And it really doesn't take a great deal of electrical knowledge to do it. Worse yet, if somebody does use one, you have to catch them red-handed using it. They leave no trace whatsoever of who's responsible. Of a larger concern is cyber attacks. I think we've all been hearing a lot about those in the news lately. The destructiveness and sophistication of cyber weapons has grown very, very rapidly and has become a major battleground internationally. I think Ukraine's a really good example of that. You know, Ukraine's power grid has suffered repeated major cyber attacks, presumably by Russia, for many years prior to this year's war. Okay, it didn't just start this year with the war. It's been going on for years and years. In the United States, industry and government are working to strengthen security against cyber threats. Critical infrastructures continually advance and adapt protective measures and security protocols. One of the most critical security priorities for state governors these days has become the protection of their electrical infrastructure against targeted attack. An extended power outage caused by a cyber attack would jeopardize the functioning of, as we've talked about, hospitals, municipal water, and we've kind of talked about all the impacts. As cyber attacks become more frequent, energy systems are increasingly being attacked. That is a primary target for these folks who are doing cyber attacks, and many of them are international in nature. The targeting of the electrical infrastructure is one of the central concerns that led the FBI to conclude that cyber attacks are eclipsing terrorism, traditional terrorism as we have known it for the last 20 years or so, eclipsing that as the major threat facing the United States. There are about 2,200 cyber attacks every day, one every 39 seconds. And a lot of people believe that is a dramatic underestimation of the actual number. And I have seen numbers that have gone up into the thousands, I mean hundreds of thousands per day. Now, the Cyber Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, reports that ransomware attacks occurred in 14 of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. 41% of these incidents involved the energy sector, particularly, guess what? Electricity. These people are no fools. They know how dependent our society is on electricity. A key central concern for both the electrical grid and other lifeline infrastructures is that confidence in assuring the security of such infrastructures against a determined, carefully planned cyber attack on systems critical to the national grid is far less than 100%. The American public says we know that we're not as well protected as we should be and would like to be. It's now broadly accepted that the risk of a multi-region, long-duration power outage associated with widely distributed grid information and operational technology and critical hardware damage is significant. In other words, there's a significant risk for a black sky event. The Department of Homeland Security reports that Russia has attempted a multi-stage effort to attack targets in the energy, utility, commercial, water, aviation, and critical manufacturing sectors since at least March of 2016. That was 6 years. Now, like cyber and IEMI attacks, a coordinated physical attack on critical infrastructure sector nodes could also create power outages of a very wide geographic scope. An even worse scenario is one or more coordinated physical attacks. That means a group of armed people physically attacking a plant. Okay? A coordinated physical attack could be integrated with one or more cyber or IEME attacks at the same time. A former Secretary of Defense said that the most destructive scenarios involve cyber actors launching several attacks on our critical infrastructure at one time in combination with a physical attack on our country. This is a quote. Attackers could also seek to disable or degrade critical military systems and communications networks. This is no secret that this is out there. He called it the possibility for a cyber Pearl Harbor. Now, cyber attacks and coordinated physical attacks, they can be domestic in origin or foreign in origin. There are 104 nuclear power plants in the United States. Now, there is a database, the Nuclear Facilities Attack Database, or NUFAD, records 80 attempted or successful disruptive incidents at nuclear power plants around the world, okay, not just in the U.S., but globally, from 1961 to 2014. These incidents range from physical attacks on facilities or related facilities, and that includes thefts, sabotage, protests, demonstrators gaining unauthorized access, unauthorized flyovers by drones or aircraft. I mean, this covers a pretty wide range of threats. This isn't necessarily people attacking a plant. Now, none of these include accidents or mechanical or infrastructure failures. These are intentional actions being made. Of these, 17 of them occurred in the United States. The rest occurred globally, elsewhere. Another study shows that there were 418 intentional attacks at power facilities or systems that have resulted in a power loss between the years 2000 and 2016. Again, these incidents have ranged from just suspicious activity, I don't like the look of that guy outside of the fence, okay, to the most frequent vandalism, to actual sabotage. There have been a little over 1,500 major power outages in the United States. Now, major is defined as impacting 50,000 people or more. These have occurred between the January of 2000 and July of 2016, affecting 49 states and Washington, D.C. Oops. Sorry about that. I got off on the wrong slide again. Most were the result of terrestrial weather. That's the good news. Most of this was terrestrial weather. It was a natural event. Most lasted 2 days or less, except those that happened outside of the continental United States. Again, Puerto Rico is a prime example. Those often lasted longer than that due to a variety of factors, including a weaker infrastructure and lack of immediate remedial resources. One of the advantages we have in the continental United States is that our power companies have gotten together and have developed a plan of mutual aid. And they work really, really well together. They kind of drop the competition and the competing lines and recognize the need to support each other in a major power outage. But if you're not in the continental United States, like Puerto Rico, now they've got to start shipping stuff to you. And if all the ports are gone, again, like what happened with Puerto Rico. Excuse me just a second here. So if if you're trying to ship stuff in and you can't get stuff in, it really complicates things. Bottom line is, although a major I'm sorry, excuse me. Although a major long-term catastrophic power outage in the continental U.S. is unlikely, it's still possible. Look at Texas in February of this last year. They're almost their whole power grid went in the middle of that freezing weather that they had. However, the threat of cyber terrorism certainly increases all of that. So let's talk about preparedness. Now we've talked about all the bad news, okay? All the scary stuff. So, how do we prepare? How do we prepare for all this? We need to look at 4 different sectors for preparedness. One is the private sector. One is government. One is ourselves as amateur radio. And one is ourselves in terms of personally and our families. And we're going to go ahead and talk about each of those separately. The Electrical Infrastructure Security Council facilitates national and international collaboration and planning for black sky events. That's their whole focus, is black sky events. One of their largest initiatives is the annual Global EarthX exercise. This is an interactive global exercise for corporate, government, and community partners. This year, it'll happen from the 1st of September through the 31st of December of 2022. And by the way, all of you can participate in that if you want. The Edison Electric Institute report entitled Before and After the Storm documents the nationwide investments and best practices of electrical utilities in the United States. Many electrical utilities invest millions upgrading their infrastructure. There are also plans in place, I mentioned this just a little bit ago, about pre-staging equipment. There's an incoming hurricane coming into the south or the east coast or wherever. They start to pull equipment from all over and personnel from all over the country, staging them just outside of where they expect the impact area, so that once that storm has passed, they can immediately move in and start to restore the electrical grid. Again, that's multiple companies working together non-competitively. There are also cooperative agreements, as I just mentioned. Federal and some state public utility commissions. Oh yes, I forgot about that. I think you all know that Congress passed a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill. Okay, some of that is targeted towards the electrical grid and water systems, internet access, that sort of thing. Okay, and I know there's a lot of political, feelings about that one way or the other, but there's some good in there. Okay, EMP. EMP has been studied and addressed diligently by the military for over 50 years. There is a congressional EMP commission, and they noted that deterring attacks by terrorists who acquire nuclear weapons, think about that as a scary thought, is especially difficult because such groups have no state identity, have only one or a few weapons, and are motivated to attack the U.S. without regard to their own physical safety. There are still approximately 1,440 tons of highly enriched uranium and around 500 tons of separated plutonium that's stockpiled globally, providing a vast array of potential targets for theft. The pervasive and covert nature of a cyber attack has dramatically affected the architecture of security protocols in the U.S. and its allies. I think the really important part is next, though. During the 20th century, the traditional security framework between the military and private industry that was always characterized by kind of a clean division. Corporate America took care of itself, the military protected the nation. That was the former way things are done. Because of the world today, government and business are now having to work together in order to increase the security of the nation's infrastructure and keep each other informed of what's going on. State governors, who have primary responsibility for the public health and safety of their citizens, also have to directly address security concerns stemming from cyber attacks. This is no longer just a federal government issue. So let's talk about amateur radio a little bit. Now, first of all, I am not aware of any specific plans in the amateur radio community that specifically addresses a black sky event. Okay, if anybody knows of one, I'd be happy to hear about it. Having said that, though, I recommend make the following recommendations. First of all, that local clubs or groups such as Aries or SATERN or whatever, RACES and so on, and individual operators do some of the following. First of all, participate in field day. But don't treat it as just an exercise, just a contest. Treat it as a contest and an exercise. Okay, that's the important part. Treat it as an exercise. Participate in the ARRL simulated emergency test or set with scenarios for a black sky event. Consider participating in the EarthX exercise. Again, as an individual you can do this, as a club you can do this. And I have sheets up here with all the reference material where I've gotten all this information from, and there will be information in there where you can go to the EarthX website and find out how to do that. I recommend that amateur radio groups, local clubs and so on, have a go-to frequency in the event of an emergency that disrupts communications. What happens if you can't call your people to tell them something has happened or page them or whatever? Have a go-to frequency for people to meet at. Selected gathering points. The repeater's down and you're at a point where you can't talk to each other as well as you're used to. Have a gathering point pre-selected. Have pre-disaster arrangements with your local served agencies. Conduct or participate in weekly nets. Help and plan or participate in local EMA or public safety exercises. As individual operators, we should all have a go kit. If you're interested in emergency communications, we should have a go kit. And I'm here to tell you, go online. There are gazillions of websites that'll give you an idea of how to put together a go kit. I'm not going to spend time doing that here. Have a personal quick deployment kit. There is a deployment kit of clothes, medication. As an emergency manager for 20 plus years, almost 30 years, I still, even though I'm retired, I still keep a satchel with a week's worth of clothes, a week's worth of medication, that sort of thing, in a kit in the trunk of my car, just in case. And have advanced pre-deployment arrangements made with your employer. If you're still employed, have advanced arrangements made so that they know there's always the possibility you may get called out quickly, and how are we going to handle that? So that you've had that discussion ahead of time rather than catching them in the middle of a board meeting and trying to explain what's going on to him. For families, have a family emergency plan. Educate your family on it. Exercise it. Have pre-selected gathering points. Have a first aid kit with a week of medications for anybody in your family that needs medications. an emergency contact list, not only for you but for the kids, so that they know who they can call. If something happens to mom and dad, who do they call for help? Now, I have to tell you, this is not an exhaustive list. Again, go to the internet. There are gazillions of websites that will give you more information than you could ever possibly use. So, bottom line, extended black sky events are unusual, but they can, and they do, happen. They're generally caused by nature or by human error rather than a human attack. However, having said that, the threat is increasing for them to be caused intentionally with malicious intent. And we have to be prepared for the possible consequences. There's my contact information. Again, it's on this sheet up here. If you want to come up and grab one, the sheet will have all the different places that I've as references where I got information from. So feel free to come up and get it. All of this will be up here. I will mention that that SATERN has a brand new website, saternusa.org. For those of you who are familiar with SATERN, that used to be saturn.org. It's now saternusa.org. And then disaster.salvationarmyusa.org. That is the National Emergency Disaster Services website. For those who want to become a member of SATERN or a disaster services volunteer, we can always use more. Go to that site and click on the volunteer tab, and it'll walk you through the process of becoming a credentialed Salvation Army volunteer. So with that, thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate it. I'll stick around. I will say we've got a SATERN booth over in Building 5 in the Hertz building in the far corner, and I'll be around there to answer questions and that sort of thing. So thank you very much.